Number 12 is actually our first territory that isn't sovereign. Like Mayotte, Réunion is an overseas department of France, but I'm giving it its very own episode. And as a 2-for-1 special, I'm throwing in the neighboring scattered islands for free. Réunion is another hotspot volcanic island of the Indian Ocean. It's a nice round island, fairly young at about 3 million years, with 2 big volcanoes, Piton de Neige, Snowy Peak, in the northwest, and Piton de la Fournaise, Furnace Peak, in the southeast. Neige hasn't erupted in 20,000 years, causing millions of tons of rock to subside and collapse, creating 3 massive calderas. It sure is wild to think that something as seemingly stable as ground could just collapse like that. Fournaise, however, is still active, very active, last erupting in 2023. The scattered islands, meanwhile, are much smaller, all of them atolls with extensive reefs. Bassa da Edia barely even breaches the water. Ile Europa is the largest, and these 2, along with João da Nova Island, sit in the Mozambique Channel. The Glorioso Islands, meanwhile, lie north of Madagascar. Neighboring Banque du Gégère is just a bank with a few rocks exposed at low tide. Tromblé Island lies east of Madagascar. The monsoon and trade winds give Réunion and the scattered islands a seasonal climate, wet December to April, dry May to November. However, the windward side of the island in the east often experiences rain even in the dry season due to the mountains. Ile Europa and Bassa da India grade into semi-arid, like southwestern Madagascar. Like the Comoros, Réunion and the islands have a pleasant tropical climate, rarely very hot. In the highlands, with rising elevation, the climate becomes cooler and temperate, sometimes frosty. Inhabiting the rugged island of Réunion are mascarene forests harboring endemic plants and animals. The scattered islands, meanwhile, are largely just barren sandy beaches with a smattering of low vegetation. Europa is large enough to have dry forest of scrubs. Réunion lies 422 miles, 679 kilometers from Madagascar, and isn't known to have been visited before the modern era. Austronesians, Swahili, and Arabs might have visited it and the scattered islands, but never settled down. 1507 Portuguese explorer Diogo Fernandes Pereira sighted Réunion, calling it Ilha de Santa Apolónia, after the saint whose feast day it was. Another explorer, Pedro Mascarenhas, gave his name to the island group he explored, the Mascarenes. Whoever was first, the Portuguese promptly ignored the island, focusing on mainland East Africa and India. The wealth of the Indies flowed into Europe. Spices, silk, porcelain made Portugal wealthy. Others, like the English and Dutch, wanted in, as did the French. 1604, King Henri IV founded La Compagnie Française pour le Commerce des Indes Orientales, the French East India Company, to get a piece of the pie. In 1642, the French claimed Santa Apollonia, only renaming it in 1649 as Ile Bourbon, after the royal house of France. The company finally began settlement in 1665, founding Sepol. It shared government duties with Saint-Denis from 1669. The Dutch abandoned nearby Mauritius, allowing the French to claim it in 1715 as Ile-de-France, becoming the new capital of the colony due to its better natural harbor. 1738, Bourbon was permanently governed from Saint-Denis. In addition to a stopover for the Indian trade goods, Ile Bourbon could also make money growing those goods. So they began laying the foundations for a plantation economy, mainly sugar and coffee. And yeah, where do you think the labor came from? Slaves, largely from Mozambique and Madagascar, locally sourced by the Malagasy slaving kingdom of Manabe. Plantations proved disastrous for the indigenous life of the island, introduced disease in animals, and habitat destruction led to the extinction of local life, notably the Réunion ibis, a large ground-dwelling bird that died out by the 18th century, misremembered as a white dodo. While Bourbon was growing cash crops, the company became involved in Indian politics, ultimately losing out to the British by 1763, with the end of the 7 Years' War. Their holdings in India reduced to a few small outposts, the company faced bankruptcy. 1769, the King of France didn't bail them out so much as bought up all their assets, including Ile Bourbon. In 1776, Captain Jacques-Marie Baudet de Tromblé de la Nugie landed and named Tromblé Island, becoming part of the colony of Ile-de-France. King Louis XVI of France was, of course, executed in 1792. and it would not do for the new République to have an island named for its former ruling house, so it was changed to Réunion to commemorate the meeting of revolutionaries that overthrew the king in 1792. Despite all the history happening in the mother country, not much change reached Réunion. Abolition of slavery was ignored, and when Napoleon seized power in 1799, he left it alone. 1806, after declaring himself emperor, Napoleon renamed Réunion to Île Bonaparte, after himself. The loss of Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti, and natural disasters killing the coffee crop made sugar king on the island. 1810, Britain invaded during the Napoleonic Wars, along with all the French islands in the Indian Ocean. The British also set the name back to Bourbon. Britain kept most of the islands they took, but gave Bourbon back to France in 1814 with the restoration of the French king. Tromblin's status was not specified, but the French assumed it was also returned. France was now left with only a handful of colonies, and would spend the 19th century rebuilding its shattered empire. Business continued as usual, and vanilla cultivation took off, making Bourbon the world's largest producer. 1848, another French Revolution occurred, definitively overthrowing the king. The Second Republic renamed Bourbon again back to Réunion, and formally abolished slavery throughout its empire. This was met with trepidation by the French planters, but soon slavery gave way to a rebranded system of indentured servitude, using people captured as slaves but freed as workers to avoid Britain's slave trade ban. Alas, the opening of the Suez Canal between India and Europe and the development of sugar beets reduced Réunion's importance, compounded by France's naval base in the Indian Ocean shifting to Mayotte in the Comoros. Local authorities attempted to arrest this with development of modern infrastructure like railroads and a new harbor. Now, back to the scattered islands. João da Nova had been discovered and named back in 1501 by Portuguese explorer João de Nova. 1506, a Portuguese ship, the Baixo da Judeia, the Jewess Shoals, ran aground on the atoll it gave its name to, corrupted as Bassa da Ilha. Boc do Gezer had been known since medieval times, but was given its name in 1678 when the British ship Geyser ran aground on it. Certainly interesting ways to discover islands. Europa was named by another British ship, the Europa, when it visited in 1774. Finally, as late as 1880, Hippolyte Kelto named the Glorioso Glorious Islands, Île des Glorieuses. I guess he was really impressed with them. Attempts at French settlement had occurred on the islands big enough to accommodate it, but didn't take. As part of the general land grab in Africa, France formally laid claim to Glorioso and Geyser in 1892, attaching them to Mayotte and dependencies in 1895, followed by the 3 Channel Islands as part of Madagascar in 1897. 1912, Mayotte, along with all its dependencies, were merged with Madagascar, creating some issues later on. With World War II's end, the Fourth French Republic reconstituted its empire in 1946. Réunion and the other old colonies of Guyane, Guadeloupe, and Martinique were all granted the honor of being an overseas department, Département d'Outre-mer, granted full rights and representation in the French Republic. Trombley, however, was presumably given to Madagascar, and the Glorioso Islands returned to a new territory of the Comoros. France had given the British colony of the Seychelles concessions to develop the Glorioso Islands until 1958, when it was bought back, but the Seychelles decided to ignore this. In 1960, as France's African empire was declaring independence, with a diverse population of Europeans, Africans, Indians, Chinese, and mixed, Réunion remained with the metropole. The Republic also rescinded the Channel Islands and Tromblin, organizing it as the territory of the scattered islands in the Indian Ocean, Territoire des Îles Éparses de l'Océan Indien, based in Réunion where there are actually people. These uninhabited islands had use as bases for French interests, especially for offshore drilling, and with no population, who's gonna object? Well, of all places, Mauritius did, freshly minted as a Commonwealth realm. Tromblin had been part of the island under French rule, but the 1814 Treaty of Paris didn't clarify Tromblin's status, leading Mauritius to believe it was theirs. They didn't do anything about it, though. And in 1972, amidst turbulent domestic issues, the Malagasy Republic claimed the Channel Islands, Tromblin and Glorioso, asserting that France had unjustly alienated them. 1974, France begins garrisoning the islands just to be safe. 1975, when the Comoros become independent, Glorioso and Geyser joined the scattered islands, causing dispute with them now. 1976, Madagascar claimed Geyser on the grounds that no one inhabits it, so it's up for grabs. In 1979, the UN ruled that the Channel Islands rightfully belonged to Madagascar. But, what are they going to do? France and the Seychelles hammer out an agreement in 2001. Glorioso is conceded to France, just in time for the scattered islands in 2005 to be combined with the French territory of southern and Antarctic lands. Territoire des terres australes et antarctiques. A bunch of cold, desolate rocks in the southern Indian Ocean. 2010, France and Mauritius began talks to co-administer Trumlin, but didn't pan out. So, to summarize, Madagascar claims all the scattered islands, the Comoros, Glorioso and Geyser, and Mauritius Trumlin. All the while, France actually controls them, leaving them as nature preserves with a few weather stations. Réunion, meanwhile, has settled as a comfortable French department. The French foster program uprooted a lot of Réunionnese children to France, where many suffered mistreatment, leading to legal actions. But Réunion's economy is strong compared to most of Africa, still mainly focused on sugar, but also tourism. Like Mayotte, staying with France proved the best option. Boy, that's a lot of islands, huh? Well, get ready, because next time we're going to go east to Mauritius, the other big masquerade. See you then.